Part 20. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 191. Seeing Katie, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly. He smiled, got out of bed, came to Katie, took the comb in her hand, took her hair, and helped her comb it. Katie sat high up and looked at herself and Chen Tao in the mirror. Chen Tao looked at Katie in the mirror, their eyes meeting each other. Katie smiled. Chen Tao smiled and said, "Is the matter of bio-civilization settled?" Katie said, "They have all been transferred to that planet. After that, I will not care about the order inside the planet. I will let Bayou handle it by himself. Those people in Bayou's civilization are, as Bayou said, quite kind," Katie added. Chen Tao nodded slightly and said, "That's good. Moreover, I also noticed that the technology possessed by the White Jade civilization is very strong." Katie continued, "The one named Bayou has fourth-generation genes. And it uses a white energy called R6 as a weapon, which is very powerful. Powerful. That weapon can easily damage the fourth generation of genes, it is very powerful." Chen Tao looked at Katie in the mirror and said with a smile, "Are you going to learn their technology?" Katie's beautiful face had a smile on her face and she said, "Yes." What Chen Tao guessed was not wrong, it was indeed the case. The technology of the dragon civilization is far different from that of the outer universe. The dragon civilization is eager to improve its technology. The technology brought by this White Jade civilization that yearns for peace is exactly what Kadi wants, and what the dragon civilization urgently needs now. Chen Tao nodded slightly and said, "Okay, when Bayou finishes her work, I will let her help you." Yes, Katie's eyes had a hint of joy, and she felt a little happy. After Chen Tao had finished combing, he leaned close to Katie's ear, kissed her forehead, and said, "It's been a long time since I've been intimate with you. Let's stay here today." Katie's face turned slightly red. She held Chen Tao's hand on her shoulder and said, "Katie is already yours. As long as you want, Katie will not refuse." Chen Tao smiled, leaned down, picked her up, and walked to the bed. Katie blushed and rested her little head on Chen Tao's shoulder. In terms of love between men and women, even Katie, the king of dragons who has lived for millions of years, is a little at a loss. At this moment, she is more like a shy and panicked little girl, very cute. Chen Tao likes Katie's cute appearance. I spent the day with Katie, enjoying the rare tender time. 3 days later, after Bayou stabilized the order within Bayou's civilization, she came to Chen Tao as agreed. Chen Tao asked Bayou to go to the dragon civilization to have cultural exchanges with Kadi and Bayou. In this way, a month passed in the blink of an eye. 1 month later, Chen Tao saw a strange scene in his sleep. In the dark universe, a huge crack appeared. This crack was even bigger than the cracks Chen Tao had seen before. A huge creature got through the crack. This behemoth was as huge as a planet. It was pitch black and emitted black mist. It looked like a huge lion. What was different from the lion was that it looked like it was covered with huge black scales and had long growths on its back. With a pair of fleshy wings. With a wave of its claws, a planet exploded. Chen Tao opened his eyes suddenly. He frowned. "Husband, what's wrong?" a bone-crushing voice came from beside him. Chen Tao came back to his senses and saw that Fang Xueqing was lying on her side next to him, her sapphire-like eyes looking at Chen Tao with worry. Noticing her look, Chen Tao smiled, raised his hand, gently touched her cheek, and said, "It's nothing." Fang Xueqing held Chen Tao's big hand with her small hand. Her eyes looked very flattering and she said, "If you are unhappy, you can tell Xueqing. Xueqing wants to help your husband." Upon hearing this, Chen Tao smiled, "You helped a lot last night." Fang Xueqing was slightly startled, as if she didn't understand, but as soon as she regained her composure, she blushed. She slowly leaned into Chen Tao's arms and said, If that can be considered a help to my husband, Xueqing is willing to help her husband more. Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled and said, okay, you can work harder after that. Yafang Xueqing was very obedient. Husband Katie's voice suddenly sounded in Chen Tao's channel. Hearing this voice, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly. At this moment, Katie's voice was serious and nervous. Chen Tao said, what's going on? Chen Tao rarely heard such a nervous and serious voice in Katie's tone. Katie said, something happened. A huge creature appeared in the universe. It was a creature that was even more terrifying and huge than the boar beast. It was as big as a planet and could not be huge. It was also terrifying in strength and ferocious in speed. Silver weapon, it can't be cut, and Baiyu's R7 weapon is no match for it. Baiyu said that it was a cosmic beast coming from the rift in the universe. Katie said, husband, I need you. Chen Tao frowned. Could it be that the huge beast he just saw in his dream was not a dream but a reality? Chen Tao said, I know, I'll be there soon. Chen Tao looked at Fang Xueqing in his arms and said softly, baby, I have something to do and I have to go out. Fang Xueqing raised her face and looked at Chen Tao. Her eyes glowed and she said, what's wrong? Chen Tao gently stroked her soft snow-white hair, kissed her forehead, and said, something happened. Well. Fang Xueqing slowly came out of Chen Tao's arms. She looked at Chen Tao and said, then be careful. Chen Tao nodded slightly, got off the bed and put on his clothes. Chen Tao disappeared out of thin air, and when he appeared again, his figure appeared in space. The scene in front of Chen Tao made his face slightly gloomy. In the sky, there were floating bodies of female dragons, floating in the air. In addition to the bodies of female dragons, there was a planet that was smashed into pieces not far away. The giant creature in the distance that looked like a lion, with scales and black mist, was approaching a star not far away. Seeing this scene, Chen Tao's hands clenched suddenly. He said, what's going on? These female dragons died just like that? Why did they die? Facing such an basically invincible enemy, would the female dragons still go to die? They used their bodies to attract the other side's attention in order to protect the civilization of this galaxy. They sacrificed themselves. Kadi's heavy voice sounded beside Chen Tao. Hearing this voice, Chen Tao looked at Kadi. Chen Tao opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but couldn't say it. If you want to blame Kadi, you can't blame her. After all, a civilization is placed in front of you, and you don't let the dragon save it. This is not in line with the beliefs of the dragon civilization. Chen Tao retracted his gaze, looked at Baiyu, and said, what's going on? Baiyu shook her head and said, I don't know either. As far as I know, the cosmic killer only exists in the cosmic cracks. They don't have the ability to open the small universe barrier. Baiyu was puzzled. Chen Tao looked forward, looked at the cosmic beast, and said lightly, no matter what it is, it must die here. Chen Tao was very unhappy. Looking at these beautiful and lovely female dragons, they just turned into corpses and died in front of him. This kind of anger made Chen Tao want to kill. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 192. Chen Tao looked at the huge monster in front of him. The huge monster that looked like a lion with fish scales was as big as a planet. It was extremely huge. Now it seemed to be attracted by the star and slowly approached the star. Although it was very large, it was still a little different from the star. In the gap of the universe, there was only darkness, without any light. It seemed to be attracted by the light, Baiyu said. Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly, and he said, you step back. Baiyu and Kadi looked at each other and stepped back. Chen Tao spread his hands. 12 huge wormholes appeared beside him. Chen Tao raised his hand and pointed at the huge monster in the distance. In an instant, 12 giant half-moon blades comparable to the size of planets shot out from the 12 huge wormholes. 12 half-moon blades flew out and shot towards the cosmic beast in the distance. The 12 giant half-moon blades were divided into two parts, one with 6 blades, and were placed on both sides of the cosmic beast. Kill. Chen Tao clenched his hands. 12 half-moon blades slashed at the cosmic beast. In this space, there was no sound. It can be seen that the moment the huge half-moon blade slashed at the cosmic killer, the half-moon blade was bounced away. All 12 half-moon blades were bounced away. Chen Tao frowned suddenly. The cosmic beast felt that it was attacked. It looked at the giant half-moon blades around it, turned back suddenly, and looked in the direction of Chen Tao. Its face was ferocious, its fangs were exposed, and its expression was full of anger. It pounced on Chen Tao at a very fast speed. The 12 giant half-moon blades combined together, like a shield, in front of the cosmic killer. Bang! Accompanied by a muffled sound. The 12 giant half-moon blades shattered. The defense formed by these 12 giant half-moon blades that were as big as planets was like paper in front of this cosmic beast. It didn't even slow down the pace of the cosmic beast. The sharp silver weapon could not attack this beast, and even the sharp silver weapon could not withstand its impact. No wonder Baiyu was so afraid of this terrifying beast. It was too abnormal. Analysis. It was too fast. This behemoth appeared in front of Chen Tao in just this moment, and its huge claws grabbed Chen Tao. At this moment, time stopped. Everything around him turned into blue code, including the behemoth in front of him that was as big as a planet. Chen Tao looked at the blue code on the behemoth in front of him. His eyebrows stretched slightly. Is the analysis effective for it? Chen Tao looked at the code on it and waved his hand. This behemoth made of blue code was wiped out in an instant. The code turned into blue dots and disappeared from the field of vision. As long as it can be analyzed, the life and death of this guy will be in Chen Tao's mind. Time resumed. The behemoth has disappeared. Chen Tao's eyes became empty. The cosmic beast was gone, but Chen Tao could see the fragments of the sharp silver weapon floating in space and the body of the female dragon floating in the air. Seeing this scene, Chen Tao slowly clenched his fists. Death. The dragon civilization regards the balance of the universe as a belief and regards the lives of others as more important than their own. If there is anyone in this world who should not die, in Chen Tao's opinion, those holy and beautiful female dragons are the ones who should not die the most. But, they still died. Just as Lin said, the second generation gene body is not invincible and will die. Has it been analyzed? A voice came from the side. Chen Tao looked back at Kadi beside him. Kadi slowly flew to Chen Tao's side. Chen Tao nodded slightly and said, "No surprise." Baiyu looked at Chen Tao and said, "The master's creation gene is really powerful. By the way, Baiyu, you just said that this cosmic beast does not have the ability to enter this universe." Baiyu on the side suddenly spoke. Baiyu nodded slightly when she heard it and said, "Yes, the cosmic beast only stays in the cosmic gap between the small universes. Apart from being powerful, it is not very intelligent and does not understand technology. The small universe is like a balloon. There is a barrier at the edge of the balloon. Only by using some high-tech analysis can it be temporarily opened. But the cosmic beast does not have this ability." Baiyu frowned and said, "In this case, I think I know what's going on." "What's going on?" Katie looked at Baiyu. Baiyu said, "I guess someone deliberately let this cosmic beast in." This guess attracted the attention of everyone on the field. Chen Tao looked at Baiyu. Baiyu said, "If I guess correctly, it is very likely that someone from outside wanted to enter our world, but was afraid to step in because of Chen Tao's existence. That's why he thought of this method, and wanted to use this method to wipe out Chen Tao." Kadi frowned. "It is possible, after all, according to what Baiyu said before, the cosmic gap is a very terrifying existence. If some people are unwilling to transfer to other small universes, they will naturally use some extraordinary means. Speaking of this, Kadi looked at Bayu and said, "Before you came in, how many other cosmic civilizations were there outside?" Kadi said, "After the expansion and explosion of the small universe we are in, many civilizations came out of the small universe. Our Bayu civilization is just one of them. Because your small universe is closer to us, many civilizations are leaning towards this side. It's just that the danger of the cosmic crack is beyond our imagination. Too many people died in order to cross the crack, and some civilizations even perished in the cosmic crack. There are only 3 civilizations left near your small universe. One is the Bayu civilization I am in, the second is the Thunder Bear civilization, and the other is the Fairy civilization." The Thunder Bear civilization, Chen Tao remembered that the king of the alien civilization who entered this small universe after Bashi called himself the Thunder Bear King. That should be the Thunder Bear civilization. What about the Fairy civilization? Chen Tao looked at Bayu and said, "Is the Fairy civilization also outside?" Bayu nodded slightly. The Fairy civilization is a group of civilizations that are good at controlling nature. They are not strong, but they have a certain immunity to space turbulence. They also have some ways to deal with cosmic beasts. However, the Fairy civilization is peace-loving like us. They are unlikely to do such dirty things, Bayu said. Chen Tao crossed his arms and said, "In this case, only the Thunder Bear civilization is left. It is almost certain that the cosmic beast was let in by the Thunder Bear civilization." "What are you going to do?" Katie looked at Chen Tao. "You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out." Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 193. Chen Tao said, "Take the dragon warriors back first, I want to cure them." Kadi was startled. She looked at Chen Tao. "Cure them? They are already dead." "Death, how to cure?" Chen Tao looked at Katie and said, "Or should I say, revive them?" Kadi blinked. She slowly pursed her lips, and nodded slightly. "Okay. It is necessary to find the Thunder Bear civilization and settle accounts with them, but Chen Tao can't just leave the bodies of these female dragons aside. So, Chen Tao plans to revive these female dragons first, and then talk about it." After making up his mind, everyone returned to the Dragon City. Under Katie's order, the bodies of the female dragons were recovered. Finally placed in front of Chen Tao. There was a large rectangular bed in front of Chen Tao, on which 23 female dragons were lying. Seeing the 23 female dragons who had already lost their voices in front of him, Chen Tao's eyes moved, and he saw a familiar face. Dragon Zhou. Dragon Manqiao is also one of the 23 female dragons. Every time she fights, she always likes to rush to the front line. This time is the same, but this time she is not as lucky as before. Death accompanies female dragons, and one day female dragons will die. Chen Tao stepped into the inner world mode. The surroundings turned into blue codes. Chen Tao looked at the blue codes on the female dragons. Those codes are too familiar. Only on dead people can these missing codes be seen. It can be confirmed that they are dead. Chen Tao said, "Xingyun, rewrite their codes and let them regain life." Received the order and rewriting. Chen Tao looked at the missing codes on the female dragons and was quickly supplemented. Only half an hour later, the codes have been supplemented. It has been written. Xingyun's mechanical voice sounded. Hearing this voice, Chen Tao slowed down the inexplicable emotions in his heart. Chen Tao does have the ability to revive them after death. But, this feels too weird. After a person dies and is resurrected, is that person still the same person? Chen Tao couldn't be sure, and he didn't dare to think too much. But at this moment, Chen Tao had made up his mind. Time resumed. What's going on? Kadi's voice came from beside him. Chen Tao said, it's done. Done. Kadi looked at the 23 people lying on the bed. Not long after, the 23 people's eyelids moved, and they stood up one after another. Seeing this scene, Kadi's eyes lit up slightly. Queen, White Dragon King. One of them noticed Kadi and Bai Yao. They all got off the bed and saluted Kadi and Bai Yao. Seeing this, Kadi nodded slightly and said, you are dead. The female dragons were slightly startled, looked at each other, and their faces were full of confusion and puzzlement. Kadi said, it was Chen Tao who resurrected you, be grateful to him. When Dragon Man Qiao heard this, she looked at Chen Tao next to her and hurriedly said, thank you, Mr. Chen. Thank you. Looking at the 23 female dragons in front of Chen Tao, he nodded slightly, then looked at Kadi and said, Kadi, I changed my mind. When Kadi heard this, she looked at Chen Tao, what idea? Chen Tao said lightly, didn't you say before that you wanted me to notify Dragon Man City? I will respond to you now. I agree to accept the identity of Dragon King. Ruling Dragon Man City and becoming the king of Dragon Man is something Chen Tao is very reluctant to do. But if Chen Tao sees these holy, noble and beautiful female dragons in front of him die because of the mission, he will feel uncomfortable and unhappy. So, Chen Tao plans to take over Dragon Man City. Upon hearing this, Kadi and Bai Yao looked at each other, and their eyes lit up. Kadi looked at Chen Tao, smiled, and said, okay. The other female dragons were confused, looking at each other, as if they didn't know what was going on. Kadi entered the exclusive channel of the Dragon King and connected the gene channels of all dragons. I am Kadi, the Dragon King Kadi. The following is my order. From now on, Chen Tao, a human from the Earth civilization, will replace me as the Dragon King. From now on, Chen Tao is the king of our dragon civilization. Seeing him is equivalent to seeing the Dragon King. Yes. Yes. The female dragons responded in the gene channel. This gene channel is obviously a gene channel unique to the dragons, but Chen Tao can hear it. It is obvious that Kadi pulled Chen Tao into this gene channel. The 23 female dragons obviously heard Kadi's voice. They looked at Chen Tao, and hurriedly knelt down on one knee in front of Chen Tao, saying, Dragon King. The voices of the 23 female dragons were crisp and pleasant. Hearing this, Chen Tao's eyebrows slightly relaxed. He looked at Kadi and said, how many female dragons are there on the front line now? Chen Tao has truly taken over the position of Dragon King. The first thing he wants to do now is to improve the combat effectiveness of the dragons. He doesn't want to see anyone die again. The most urgent thing to do now is to improve the combat effectiveness of the female dragons on the front line, because if something goes wrong, they will be the first to get into trouble. Kadi folded her hands on her chest and said thoughtfully, there are currently a total of 10 million warriors on the front line. There are too many civilizations in the universe. Each of these 10 million female dragons is responsible for the balance of 3 or 4 civilizations. Hearing this, Chen Tao nodded slightly. Chen Tao raised his hand. In his palm, blue light spots filled the air. As the light spots spread, matter formed on Chen Tao's palm. Turned into a silver sword. He handed the sword to Kadi. Kadi took it, doubt on her face, and she put her hand on the sword. The long sword was loaded with a program. She opened the program and took a look. Seeing the programming ability loaded in the long sword, Kadi's pupils froze slightly, and she suddenly looked at Chen Tao, is this Lei Hao's lightning technology? Chen Tao said, I made improvements and used Lei Hao's thunder technology to create this thunder engine. Using the thunder engine can release powerful thunder attacks. I have done tests before and this thunder engine can easily destroy the 4th generation gene body. Kadi's eyes glowed a little, and she said, what are you? Chen Tao said, in a moment, find me a larger warehouse. I can program 10 million of these weapons and replace them with all the female dragons on the front line. I want to improve the overall strength of the entire dragon city. Katie pursed her lower lip and looked at Chen Tao, who looked a little shocked. She had to be shocked that Chen Tao's seemingly random weapon had the ability to kill the 4th generation gene body. This is much more powerful than the sharp silver weapons that Katie has worked hard to collect for millions of years. But now Chen Tao wants to distribute this top-level weapon in batches. It's too exaggerated. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 194. Katie looked at Chen Tao and said, if this cutting-edge weapon is used too much, I'm worried that if someone with malicious intentions gets it, something unexpected will happen. Chen Tao's eyebrows relaxed slightly. He looked at Katie and said, before that, I will upgrade your and Bai Yao's genetic bodies to the 5th generation. I will give the female dragons who can be trusted more powerful technology. Hearing this, Katie understood. She nodded slightly and said, if this is the case, the overall strength will increase so that we can continue to maintain order in the Dragon City. Besides, Chen Tao held a set of silver white armor in his hands and handed it to Katie. Katie took it and raised her hand. After taking a look, the sight that caught his eye made Katie's eyes tremble slightly. The armor was loaded into a program, and the content of the program was, this armor is immune to physical attacks, this armor is immune to mental attacks. She raised her face and looked at Chen Tao, what is this? This was the first time for Katie to see this kind of procedure. Chen Tao said, I call it a super-conceptual armor. This kind of armor was written by me using code. It is a substance that does not exist in this universe. I redefined this substance and created this super-conceptual armor. Chen Tao said, unless there is a computer more powerful than mine, wearing this armor will not be attacked by physical or mental forces. Katie looked directly at Chen Tao, her eyes full of disbelief. Chen Tao looked at the 23 female dragons. These 23 female dragons were looking directly at Chen Tao, their eyes glowing with a hint of admiration. Chen Tao said, let me put it on for you first. As he spoke, he raised his hand and snapped his fingers. Crack. There was a crisp sound. They came back to their senses and looked down, only to find that the armors on their bodies had all been replaced by silver white armor, which looked very handsome and mighty. There was also a silver sword on the bed in front of them. Dragon Man Chiao raised his hand, holding the long sword in his hand, and then looked at Chen Tao. Looking at the scene in front of him, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly. In fact, Chen Tao didn't need to snap his fingers at all, but he did it in order to give them a warning. Otherwise, changing their clothes without any movement would inevitably give them some strange thoughts. Chen Tao said, you log into them first, connect their programs, and let them recognize their master. Okay, they said in unison. The girl's clear and crisp voice sounded in unison, which was quite pleasant to the ears. Chen Tao crossed his arms and looked at them. They are already familiar with the procedures for logging in armor and weapons, and logging in their own information. Are you ready? Chen Tao asked aloud. All right. All right. The girls all spoke up. Chen Tao nodded slightly and said, after our investigation, we found that the monster that killed you was introduced by a civilization outside the universe. The culprit was not the beast, but the civilization outside the universe. Now, wearing this super concept armor and holding a thunder engine sword, you already have the ability to level them. Then, are you willing to follow me and leave this small universe to fight against the culprit who destroyed the balance of the universe? Girls, you look at me, I look at you, and then we look at Chen Tao together. Willing. This unanimous voice sounded. Hearing this voice, Chen Tao nodded slightly. He looked at Katie and said, let's go out and be back soon. Katie was slightly startled and said, I want to go too. Hearing this, Chen Tao raised his hand, gently stroked her hair, and said, "No, now I am the king of the dragons. From now on, I want you to stay outside the Dragon City and be a housewife, handle the affairs in Dragon City for me. As for the matters outside, I will take care of them." Katie looked into Chen Tao's eyes. Chen Tao's face was full of indifference, and his eyes also revealed a trace of indifference and a trace of tenderness. Katie could feel the aura of a king emanating from Chen Tao. That kind of aura surrounds Chen Tao. Only then did Katie realize that the man in front of her was no longer the same person as before. Chen Tao has programmed the sun, programmed a galaxy, created a galaxy with life, and fought against 10,000 people. His experience has already unconsciously given Chen Tao strong self-confidence and courage. Everything he possesses has satisfied all the needs of becoming a king. Chen Tao just didn't show it before, but now, Katie can feel Chen Tao's courage. Katie's eyes were glowing, and the corners of her mouth were slightly raised as she said, "Well." In front of him, Katie found that she, who had always been aloof, could only listen to him like a little girl. Chen Tao withdrew his hand, looked at Longren Jiao and the others, and said, "Let's go." After the words fell, Chen Tao, Bai Yu and the 23 female dragons disappeared together. Looking at the place where Chen Tao disappeared, Bai Yu crossed his arms and said, "He left us behind in the first battle." When Katie heard this, she looked at Bai Yu, smiled and said, "Isn't it good? I think it's pretty good. Girls should handle family affairs for him at home." Bai Yu looked at Katie and she said, "I see you are so fascinated by him that you have forgotten who you are." Katie said, "I haven't forgotten that I am Katie, his dragon girl, and I belong to him." Looking at the direction Chen Tao left, her eyes were filled with luster. Bai Yu looked at Katie's obsessed look on the side. She could only shake her head helplessly and said, "I have always heard that the IQ of girls in love will decrease. I didn't believe it before, but now I believe it." When Katie heard this, she looked at Bai Yu, she smiled and said, "I had planned to make Chen Tao our queen and open a back garden in Dragon City." Back garden? Doesn't our Dragon City already have a back garden? Bai Yu looked at Katie. Katie smiled and said, "This is not an ordinary back garden. What is planted in this back garden are not ordinary flowers, but beautiful and holy female dragons. And I also want you to be one of them." Hearing this, Bai Yu was startled. She glanced at Katie and said, You are so crazy. However, I don't care, after all, he will not agree to this." "That's not necessarily true." Katie smiled, "After all, he didn't intend to become the king of dragons before." Bai Yu's face turned slightly red, and she said, "Whatever you want to do, you do it. Anyway, don't involve me in this matter. I don't want to be treated like a flower." She turned and left. Looking at Bai Yu's back, Katie smiled and said nothing. She looked in the direction where Chen Tao left, her eyes glowing with luster. At the same time, Chen Tao took Dragon Man Qiao and the others into space. This place was the place that Chen Tao had seen in his dream before. The cosmic beast came from this location at that time. In other words, as long as the cosmic barrier here is torn apart, the nearest civilization outside can basically be determined to be the cosmic beast that was let in by that civilization. Chen Tao raised his hand, and a crack appeared in the dark space. Chen Tao spread his wings behind him and flew into the crack. Dragon Man Qiao and the others also followed. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 195. After tearing open the crack in the universe, Chen Tao entered the crack and everything he saw gave Chen Tao a strange feeling. It was pitch black. Is this the rift in the universe? There was no light, and I couldn't see my fingers when I stretched out my hand. There is no light in the cracks in the universe. If you want light in this place, you have to rely on yourself. Bai Yu's voice came from beside him. Bai Yu said, however, you must be careful when using light. Light will attract vicious beasts from the universe. Hearing this, Chen Tao frowned slightly. Time stops passing. The surrounding area turns into blue code. Through this blue code, Chen Tao can see everything around him. As long as it is matter, it turns into a blue code. Bai Yu and the 23 female dragons all turned into blue codes. In addition to them, Chen Tao could also see the blue code that looked like bubbles in the distance. The bubbles one after another looked very small, but Chen Tao could be sure that the bubbles closest to him were also very, very far away. If Chen Tao guessed correctly, then the blue code that should look like bubbles should be other small universes. It's really like bubbles. Chen Tao looked around and landed not far away. Found it? Not far away there were Boolean beasts made of blue code, and it looked like there were tens of thousands of them. The codes of these Boolean beasts are very familiar, they are the Boolean beasts of the Thunder Bear civilization. Chen Tao narrowed his eyes. Sure enough, it's those bastards. Time resumes its passage. I can find the location of nearby civilizations. A white jade voice came from beside him. At this time, the light came on. Chen Tao looked at the light source, which came from the palm of Bai Yu's hand. A light lit up in Bai Yu's hand. The light was blue. It was a 3D blue light ball with a needle inside. Bai Yu looked at Chen Tao and said, "This is a cosmic navigator. Its function is to determine the direction. It can also find companions in this dark world. If there are other civilizations nearby, this cosmic navigator will point in that direction." Bai Yu looked at the blue light ball in his hand. At this time, the blue needle inside the sphere rotated and pointed in one direction. Seeing this, Bai Yu looked at Chen Tao and said, "The civilization closest to us is in that direction. Do you want to go there?" Hearing this, Chen Tao stretched his eyebrows slightly and said, "Of course. This thing looks good, because it is pointing in the direction that Chen Tao just saw, the direction where the Boolean beast of the Thunder Bear civilization is. Let's go then." Bai Yu held the cosmic navigator, flapped her wings and flew in that direction. The cosmic navigator lit up, illuminating the front. Chen Tao also flapped his wings and followed. The female dragons also flapped their wings and passed by. At the same time, inside a giant boar beast, Thunder Bear King Cole was sitting on the large bed. Next to Cole, a beautiful and petite woman was nestling in Cole's arms. Cole gently touched the woman's shoulder, looked at the man in front of him, and said, "How is the situation?" When the man in black armor heard this, he lowered his head and said, "That cosmic beast was analyzed by the man named Chen Tao." Analyzed? Cole's pupils shrank slightly. Does that guy really have the creation gene? Even the ferocious beasts of the universe can be analyzed. Cole's face was full of disbelief. Although Cole heard with his own ears that Chen Tao had the power of 6 generations of genes and had seen Chen Tao's power, Cole had no intention of trusting Chen Tao from the beginning. Cole slapped his thigh with his big hand and said, "I sacrificed so many warriors to lead the cosmic beast over there. I didn't expect that the cosmic beast would be so useless. King, will that person come to take revenge on us?" The man had uneasiness on his face. Cole frowned, glanced at the man, and said, "What are you afraid of? Even if he has the creation gene, in the end, the place they are in is just a low-level civilization. How could they know that the beast is us? Put it away. I guess they don't even know what that thing is. Besides, even if he knows that someone let the cosmic beast in, how can he be sure it's us?" Cole showed a disdainful smile. The man nodded slightly and said, "Your Majesty is still thoughtful." Cole frowned slightly and was too lazy to speak. At this time, a man ran in from outside the door, looking panicked. "King, it's not good." Upon hearing this, Cole looked at the man and said calmly, "Why are you panic? Don't scare my woman, calm down before talking." When the man heard this, he nodded slightly and said, "Wang, Bai Yu is flying over here with that guy named Chen Tao and 23 female dragons. Cole's expression suddenly changed, and he was so frightened that he said, "That guy is here." Looking at Cole's ugly expression, the male warrior was slightly startled and didn't know what to say. Cole gritted his teeth and said, "By you, that bitch. If it weren't for her, they definitely wouldn't know it was us, that bitch." Cole gritted his teeth, his face full of hatred. "King, what should I do?" the man looked at Cole. Cole frowned and said, "Fight. In this rift in the universe, there is no way to use black holes. Even if that guy wants to destroy us, it's not that simple. As soon as they get close, fire the R9 beam and freeze them into stone," Cole said. Yes, the two warriors left together. Looking at the backs of the two warriors, Cole frowned. "By you, that bitch." At the same time, through the light emitted by the cosmic navigator, Chen Tao saw tens of thousands of boar beasts in front of him, all crowded together. Go Chen Tao looked at Dragon Man Zhou and said, "Use the weapons given to you to destroy them. Let them know that there is still dragon civilization in our universe." "Okay," Dragon Man Zhou said. She spread her dragon wings, holding a silver-white long sword, and swept towards the behemoth in front. Suddenly, the horn on the top of one of the boar beasts shot out a dark purple light, shooting at Dragon Man Zhou. Dragon Man Zhou quickly turned sideways and dodged. As soon as he dodged, Dragon Man Zhou swung the silver-white long sword in his hand violently, and a lightning bolt emerged from the sword body and blasted towards the boar beast. Boom! Accompanied by a loud noise. The bull beast was enveloped by lightning, its body was covered with black mist, it slowly turned up its belly, fell down, and stopped moving. Seeing this, Dragon Man Xiao's eyes lit up, and she looked at the long sword in her hand that was still flashing with lightning in disbelief. The material made of the bull beast was something that even the sharp silver weapon could not cut. Dragon Man Xiao had never expected that he could actually chop the huge beast into charcoal with just one sword. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 196. On the other side. Inside the bull beast where Cole lives. In the command hall. Cole was wearing armor, holding a broadsword, and sitting on a chair. King Cole, the Thunder Bear, who saw the scene through the screen, had his eyes widened, and he couldn't help but stand up. What's going on? What kind of weapon is that? King, that seems to be an energy weapon, very powerful. Our bull beast warship can't withstand such energy, a Thunder Bear warrior said. Cole frowned tightly and said, "Use R9 light wave. Blast her down." Yes, the Thunder Bear warrior nodded, and then hurriedly operated the operating table. While Dragon Zhou was shocked by the power of the sword in his hand, a dark purple light shot over. The light was very fast, and Dragon Zhou turned his head and saw that her face changed. At this moment, Dragon Zhou couldn't dodge at all. The dark purple light shot on Dragon Zhou. The armor on Dragon Zhou's body lit up slightly. An invisible shield appeared in front of Dragon Zhou. The R9 light wave was absorbed by the shield and disappeared without a trace. Dragon Man Xiao was slightly startled. She thought she was going to be in trouble, but she didn't expect to be hit directly by the light wave, but she found that she had no scars at all. Dragon Man Xiao touched the armor on her body, and she understood it all at once. Her eyebrows stretched slightly, looking at the tens of thousands of behemoths in front of her. She showed a confident smile and said, "It's my turn." She spread her wings and flew over at a very fast speed. R9 light waves shot out from the horns of those bull beasts and hit Dragon Man Xiao. Dragon Man Xiao did not dodge or avoid those light attacks on her, but she was not hurt at all. Lightning flashed out. Boom! A bull beast turned into black charcoal. Other female dragons saw the scene and flew over one after another. Join the slaughter. Chen Tao crossed his arms and looked at the scene in front of him. Frankly speaking, this super concept weapon was just a sudden idea of Chen Tao. His idea at the time was that since Nebula can program weapons and materials, can it program customized props? And now Chen Tao is sure that this is possible. In this way, the super concept armor is simply a cheat. Those bull beasts have no killing power on the female dragons at all, and the swords with lightning engines in the hands of the female dragons are like artifacts, slaughtering the bull beasts. Some bull beasts opened their mouths, and many thunder bear warriors flew out of their mouths. They held R9 thermal weapons and used thermal weapons to fight against the female dragons. However, these physical attack weapons can't hurt the female dragons at all. The female dragon waved the long sword in her hand, and lightning surrounded it. The lightning swept through the thunder bear warriors, and the thunder bear warriors turned directly into powder. What is this? What are they wearing? Thunder Bear King Cole's face was ashen, and he looked at the scene through the screen in disbelief. No. I don't know. The Thunder Bear warrior who was operating the operating table next to him had cold sweat on his forehead, and he didn't know what it was. Thunder Bear King Cole said, "Contact the man named Chen Tao." "Okay," the Thunder Bear warrior said hurriedly. Chen Tao heard the voice from the gene channel. "Chen Tao, why did you attack us? We have already said that we will not invade your universe again. Why don't you let us go?" It was Cole's voice. Hearing this voice, Chen Tao said lightly, "You are about to die, and you still want to pretend to be confused." "No, what do you mean by pretending to be confused?" Cole was going to pretend to be confused until he died. Chen Tao narrowed his eyes, and his hand slowly loosened. "In this case, then you can explain to the god of death after you die." As he said, a little blue light appeared around Chen Tao, and the light was writing matter. Not long after, a giant black half-moon blade appeared beside Chen Tao. As soon as the half-moon blade was formed, it instantly shot towards the bull beast in the distance. Puff, the bull beast responded and broke into two pieces. Boom. The bull beast is not a living creature, but a celestial computer made of machinery. After being cut into two pieces by the half-moon blade, the bull beast exploded directly. The air was surging. Chen Tao's sight fell on the most huge bull beast in the distance. Chen Tao said lightly, "That bull beast is so big, I think you should be inside that bull beast, right?" Chen Tao controlled the giant half-moon blade that was as big as an asteroid, and the half-moon blade suddenly slashed at the bull beast. The half-moon blade spun wildly and shot at the bull beast. Don't, I admit that I did it. I was wrong, I lost, please forgive me." Cole realized the crisis, and he hurriedly begged for mercy. Chen Tao narrowed his eyes and said, "It's too late." Boom. Accompanied by a loud bang. The half-moon blade directly cut off the huge bull beast, and the bull beast was broken into two pieces, and then exploded directly, making a loud bang. The loud bang was accompanied by a gust of wind, blowing Chen Tao's hair and clothes up. The gene channel also became quiet, and Cole's voice disappeared. The giant half-moon blade continued to swim. The remaining boar beasts were cut into two pieces one by one in the face of this terrifying giant half-moon blade. As long as the half-moon blade passed by, it meant death. The tens of thousands of boar beasts faced the crazy attacks of Chen Tao's giant half-moon blade and the 23 female dragons. Those who run will run, those who will die will die. Lasts about half an hour. It was quiet. The female dragons flew back and landed in front of Chen Tao. Longren Chiao walked out. She looked at Chen Tao, with a smile on her face and said, "Wang, it's done." Seeing the proud smile on her face, Chen Tao also smiled and said, "Go back." Chen Tao turned around and opened the cracks in the small universe. Chen Tao left with Baiyu and these female dragons. The cracks in the small universe slowly returned to their original state. However, what Chen Tao didn't know was that when they left, a girl with wings was flying in the air and looking quietly to the side. When Chen Tao and others left, she looked at the pile of ruins of the battleship. Although it is a low-level civilized universe, has it evolved to be so powerful because of the existence of the creation gene? The Thunder Bear civilization would actually suffer such a massacre. The girl murmured to herself, and not long after, her figure disappeared into thin air. Other side. Chen Tao led everyone back to Dragon City. Chen Tao looked at Longren Jiao and the others and said, "The mission is accomplished, you can move freely." "Yes," Longren Jiao said immediately. She looked at Chen Tao with eyes full of admiration. Noticing Longren Jiao's eyes, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly. "Husband, is it solved?" a voice came from behind. Chen Tao looked back at Katie beside him. Katie looked at Chen Tao with a smile on her face. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 197. Chen Tao looked at Katie and said, "If your husband takes action, of course he will succeed immediately." Katie showed a smile. "Yeah." Katie said, "I have prepared a warehouse according to your instructions to store super concept armor and weapons equipped with thunder engines. Do you want to go there now?" Hearing this, Chen Tao nodded slightly. Katie lifted up and made a stroke in the void, and a miniature wormhole appeared. Katie looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao stepped in. Katie also followed into the micro wormhole. Chen Tao looked at the huge warehouse in front of him, and then looked at Katie beside him. Katie was coming out of the micro wormhole. She looked at Chen Tao and said, "Dragon City is actually a planet made by machinery. There are many satellites made by machinery in this planet. We are here. There are many buildings built in the satellite to display our weapons and equipment. Now we are on one of the satellites, and this warehouse is big enough." Katie looked at Chen Tao and said, "I want to put 10 million sets of super concept armor and 10 million thunder engine swords, enough for use. I will have these armors and weapons distributed later." Chen Tao nodded slightly and looked at the warehouse. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers. A pile of things appeared on the left side of the warehouse. On one side was a hill-like pile of silver swords and on the other side was a hill-like pile of armor. Although Chen Tao just snapped his fingers, Chen Tao had actually just used the otherworld mode and spent more than an hour in the other world. He used this hour to program these weapons and armors. Katie's eyes lit up slightly, and she looked at Chen Tao with a glint in her eyes. Chen Tao said, "Where is Bai Yao?" Katie said, "Bai Yao is probably at her residence." "What's wrong?" She looked at Chen Tao. Chen Tao suddenly took the initiative to ask Bai Yao, which made Katie a little novel. Could it be that Chen Tao is interested in Bai Yao? Chen Tao said, "Time waits for no one. I said before that I will upgrade your and Bai Yao's genes to the 5th generation, and prepare some advanced technological weapons for you. Bai Yao must be in front of you to upgrade your genes." It turns out that this is the case. Katie thought Chen Tao was interested in Bai Yao. Katie nodded slightly and said, "I'll take you there." As she spoke, she raised her hand. Micro wormholes appear. Chen Tao entered the micro wormhole. As soon as he stepped into the micro wormhole, Chen Tao was slightly startled by the sight he saw. This is a hot spring, with a light mist rising in the hot spring. In this mist-filled hot spring, a stunning woman with snow-haired hair is soaking in the hot spring, her eyes looking at Chen Tao. This woman is Bai Yao. Bai Yao's eyes were filled with luster and he pursed his thin lips. Bai Yao is beautiful. What stands out about Kadi is the dignity, holiness, and nobility, while what stands out about Bai Yao is the aloofness. As for his figure, Bai Yao has a mature and tall figure, and his skin is as white as cream. She has a prominent white face, and her aloof temperament makes her feel like an iceberg. She is a completely aloof iceberg beauty. And now Bai Yao is soaking in the hot spring, face to face with Chen Tao. Chen Tao didn't know what to say for a moment. Katie walked out of the micro wormhole. When she saw this scene, she was slightly startled. There was no embarrassment on her face, but a smile. She looked at Bai Yao and said, "Chen Tao said that he wants to help us upgrade our genes. He said I'm coming to find you. I'll bring him here." Bai Yao raised her hand and took out a bath towel from the micro wormhole. She stood up and wrapped the bath towel around her body as she stood up. Her face remained indifferent and unique to the iceberg beauty, but Chen Tao could notice that Bai Yao's cheeks still had a lot of color. A hint of blush. Bai Yao glanced at Chen Tao, then looked at Katie and said, "You didn't say anything to me before you came here. See what it's like." Hearing this, Katie smiled, crossed her arms, and said, "What does it matter? In the end, our sisters will be his possessions." She spoke very confidently. Chen Tao was so confident that he was a little confused. What did this mean? Bai Yao blushed and rolled his eyes at Katie. She looked away, ignored Katie, opened a miniature wormhole and said, "Wait a moment, I'll get dressed." With that said, she entered the miniature wormhole. Looking at Bai Yao's leaving figure, Chen Tao couldn't help but think of the steps Bai Yao took when she just left. When he thought of that step, he thought of her slender and straight legs. Bai Yao has a slender figure and naturally long legs. Paired with her fair and jade-like skin, it is quite impressive. "Husband, what do you think of Bai Yao?" Katie's voice came from beside him. Chen Tao was slightly startled and looked at Katie. Katie crossed her arms and said with a smile, "Husband, if you want, you can let her be the first flower in your back garden." Hearing this, Chen Tao smiled bitterly, raised his hand, stroked Katie's hair, and said, "Why are you still thinking about this? Didn't I already say it? The back garden plan is impossible. Even if I agreeing to manage dragon civilization, that plan is also impossible." Katie looked at Chen Tao, she pursed her thin lips, looked at Chen Tao, and said, "Don't consider it? Don't consider it?" Katie said, "Okay, it's a pity. Bai Yao is still single now, and I think she is quite interested in you." "Quite interested? Could it be that Bai Yao also?" Chen Tao wanted to ask, but closed his mouth. Let's forget about this kind of thing. Chen Tao felt that he already had enough confidants around him, and it would be too much to add more. After a while, a miniature wormhole appeared in front of Chen Tao. Bai Yao walked out of the miniature wormhole. Seeing Bai Yao in front of him, Chen Tao felt his eyes light up slightly. Bai Yao was wearing a white and blue long skirt. The long skirt fit her tall and mature figure. The skirt straps outlined her slender waist, and her upper body held up the fabric high. The skirt was very long and fit her slender legs. She was wearing a pair of white high heels, which made her look very tall. The iceberg beauty goes with this casual outfit. Chen Tao smelled a fresh breath, which was a very special feeling. Bai Yao looked at Chen Tao and said, "Upgrading your genes, I guess you don't need to wear armor anymore? In my home, I still like to dress more casually." Chen Tao nodded slightly. "Upgrading genes has nothing to do with clothing." "You two, come and stand in front of me," Chen Tao said. Bai Yao and Katie walked up to Chen Tao and came face to face with Chen Tao. Time stops passing. Bai Yao and Katie both turned into blue codes and looked at the two humanoid codes in front of them. Chen Tao said, "Nebula, upgrade your genes. Receive the order and start upgrading genes. My time is running out." Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 198. After finishing the matter of dragon civilization, Chen Tao returned to base number 1. Although he is now the king of the dragon people, it does not mean that he must stay in the dragon people city. However, because he became the king of the dragon civilization, some changes happened around him. King, someone in the Swan civilization prayed to the dragon people, saying that his people were treated unfairly, and his power was small, and he hoped to get help from the dragon people. Do we want to help them? This sentence comes from the Gene channel, Speaking it's Joe, the dragon man. Chen Tao, who heard the sound, was lying on the bed sleeping. No way, Chen Tao was woken up by the sound. He opened his eyes and responded to Longren Jiao, do as you like. Yes, Dragon Man Jiao responded respectfully. The sound disappeared. Chen Tao turned over slightly and looked at the ceiling. Different from the past, Chen Tao needs to deal with some problems, and these problems are all problems that will affect the balance of the universe. There are big ones and small ones, big enough to threaten the universe, and small enough for ordinary people to fight with gangsters. Only now did Chen Tao know how lenient the dragons were. Long Ren Qiao and Long Renkin became Chen Tao's right-hand man. According to Katie, it is the Dragon King's Claw. They will help Chen Tao deal with trivial matters in Dragon City, and at the same time, they will tell Chen Tao some things that they think are more important and let Chen Tao solve them. The two of them have the qualifications to contact Chen Tao directly. If Chen Tao wants to give orders to the dragon people in Dragon City, he can give orders directly to the two of them. At the same time, he can also go to the genetic channel to directly contact the female dragon people he wants to contact. It's just that there are too many trivial matters, and they often ask strange questions. He said that he would help Chen Tao with trivial matters, but Chen Tao felt that everything was thrown at him. "Husband, what's wrong?" a gentle female voice came from beside me. Chen Tao turned his head and looked at the girl lying next to him. Lin was looking at Chen Tao with moving eyes. Meeting Lin's gaze, Chen Tao turned slightly, hugged her gently, stroked her hair with his hand, looked into her moving eyes, and said, "The problem of Dragon City." Hearing this, Lin smiled and said, "I guess it was Chiao who contacted you." Chen Tao blinked and couldn't help but smile, "You have guessed this." Lin Yingying smiled and said, "It's not difficult to guess that this is the duty of the Dragon King." Although Dragon King Chiao is an older frontline warrior, in the final analysis, she is still a pure warrior. After becoming the claw of the Dragon King, many of the things she saw were beyond her ability to solve. After all, warriors are for fighting, not for thinking. Lin looked at Chen Tao and said, "Naturally, there will be many questions, and you will need to give her answers." Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly and he said, "No wonder I think she comes to ask me everything." "Well, I used to be like this too," Lin said with a smile. Upon hearing this, Chen Tao looked at Lin. Lin looked into Chen Tao's eyes and smiled, "Are you surprised? I used to be the claw of the Dragon King." Chen Tao couldn't help but smile, scratched her little nose with his hand, and said, "So that's it?" Lin slowly leaned her little head in Chen Tao's arms and said, "In Dragon City, many female dragons are pure warriors. They are all immersed in their own battles and only hope to leave some legendary stories. In addition, they will only regard faith as their own and not think too much. A pure warrior." Chen Tao looked at the ceiling. In fact, those trivial matters were okay. The thing that depressed Chen Tao the most was probably the current incident. Because he has been too leisurely recently, Chen Tao has the habit of sleeping in. He usually doesn't get up until around 9 o'clock in the morning. But now, very early in the morning, at 5 or 6 o'clock, Lin started to contact Chen Tao, which always woke him up from his sweet dreams. This made Chen Tao uncomfortable. "Chen Tao, can you hear me?" Suddenly, a voice sounded in Chen Tao's head. Hearing this familiar voice, Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly. Vilya. Since separation from Wei Lia, Chen Tao has not heard Wei Lia's voice for several months. Hearing Wei Lia's voice again, Chen Tao felt a sense of familiarity. Wei Lia's voice was still the same as before, calm and full of kingly aura. Chen Tao said, "You can hear it?" Wei Lia said calmly, "I heard you say before that you are interested in dragons." Chen Tao's eyebrows stretched slightly. Why did she say this? Chen Tao said, "Well, but I have no interest now." "No," Wei Lia suddenly said, I think you will be interested now. This dragon is different from the dragons in our world. I guess it should be like you, coming from the world in the sky. It was huge, covered in red, and could spit out flames. I suffered a lot. Chen Tao's heart moved and his eyebrows stretched. A fire-breathing dragon? Chen Tao stood up and leaned against the bed. Wei Lia said, if you are interested, you can come and take a look. If you are not interested, then I can only treat it as dinner. Her voice was still calm. As a queen, she has that kind of powerful courage. A fire-breathing dragon is not easy to deal with. But with Wei Lia's wisdom and strength, Chen Tao did not think that the dragon could threaten Wei Lia. If Chen Tao really doesn't want it, maybe Wei Lia will turn that dragon into dinner. Chen Tao said, I'll go take a look. The fire-breathing dragon is not the big lizard with wings from before. Chen Tao became quite interested. Well, then I'll wait for you to come over. Vilia's voice had a hint of joy. Chen Tao looked at Lin beside him and said, have you ever encountered a fire-breathing dragon before? Lin was startled, she blinked her eyes, and like Chen Tao, she slowly sat up, leaned against the bed lazily, looked at Chen Tao and said, dragon, for us, the dragon is a very ancient thing, it no longer existed before I was born, but I have read information about dragons from the Dragon King's Academy. Although in the mythology of your world, my husband, it is said that dragons can breathe fire, in fact. In the records of our world, dragons cannot breathe fire. It's just that it's relatively large, with thick skin and thick flesh, and it also has a certain amount of intelligence. If it were in the cold weapon era, it would be a very difficult existence to deal with, Lin said, but now, it is actually just a beast. Just a big lizard. Hearing this, Chen Tao nodded slightly. In other words, is the dragon in Kayada a strange creature? Chen Tao became more interested. He looked at Lin, got closer, kissed Lin's lips, looked into her blurred eyes, and said with a smile, you stay at home, I'll go out first. Hearing this, Lin's eyes glowed, and she said, yes. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 199. Chen Tao got out of bed, and Lin came down obediently and helped Chen Tao put on his clothes. Feeling Lin's tenderness, Chen Tao turned around, kissed her forehead, and said softly, I'm leaving first. Lin nodded slightly. Chen Tao's figure disappeared from the spot. Seeing Chen Tao's voice disappearing out of thin air, Lin's eyes glowed and she smiled. Her man loves her very much, and after being sure of this, she is in a very good mood. At the same time, Chen Tao's figure appeared next to Wei Lia. He looked at Vilia in front of him. Vilia was wearing a suit of armor, riding on the back of a griffin, flying in the air with a heroic appearance. Chen Tao's figure also appeared in mid-air, and the rings on his fingers turned into wings. The wings flapped and followed Vilia. Wei Lia looked at Chen Tao and said, here he comes. Chen Tao looked at Wei Lia's elegant and moving eyes. He nodded slightly and said, here he comes. Wei Lia said, want to ride up? Her meaning was very clear, she wanted Chen Tao to ride on the back of her griffin. Chen Tao looked at the back of the griffin, then at Vilia's slender back, and said, forget it. When Wei Lia heard this, she withdrew her gaze and looked ahead. Chen Tao looked around. It was discovered that behind Vilia, there was a group of warriors riding griffins. The soldiers also noticed Chen Tao's presence and looked at Chen Tao's side. Chen Tao withdrew his gaze, looked at Wei Lia, and said, what are you doing? Vilia said, hunting. After the dragon appeared, it killed many of my people and burned the crops we prepared for the winter. Kayada could not tolerate it. Chen Tao looked at Wei Lia and said, do you have a plan? Hearing this, Wei Lia glanced sideways at Chen Tao, withdrew his gaze and said, "First we will use 6 people to attract its attention, and then we will use fire-resistant green leaves to make a green rope, and use the green rope to draw it, constrain its movements, and then let Muen attack with a thick spear and bleed it like last time." Fire-resistant rope? This was something Chen Tao didn't expect. Indeed, if there was a fire-resistant rope, even if the dragon could breathe fire, it would be of little use. Chen Tao said, "I'm interested in that dragon. If not, let me do it." When Wei Lia heard this, she looked at Chen Tao and said, "No need." "Need not?" Chen Tao looked at Wei Lia. He didn't expect that Wei Lia would refuse. "Although you have fireproof ropes, what you do is still dangerous. If you let me come." "I said, no need," Wei Lia interrupted Chen Tao. "As a queen, Valia has the courage that a queen should have." Wei Lia said, "That evil dragon has injured so many of our people and burned so many of our crops and food. To us, it is an enemy. We have to deal with our enemies. If we have to rely on the help of outsiders, what should we do if we encounter such an enemy again in the future?" Hearing this, Chen Tao understood that Wei Lia planned to increase experience for his men. "And, as a queen, I need to personally give an explanation to my people," Vilia said lightly. "If the prestige is killed with the help of Chen Tao's power, then the prestige of the Queen Wei Lia will not be that high in front of others. However, if Wei Lia personally takes revenge and hunts down the dragon, then the prestige of Wei Lia will skyrocket. Is this how a queen becomes a king?" Chen Tao looked at Wei Lia, and he couldn't help but admire this woman. As expected of the Dragon King's Academy calculations, she was the most suitable person to take over as the next Dragon King. She was indeed born to be a leader. There are many more things on her mind than what Chen Tao thinks. Chen Tao looked away. As a king, he felt inferior to Wei Lia. But Chen Tao doesn't care. After all, Chen Tao never thinks that he is a king. The reason why he accepted the purpose of being the king of dragons is simply to protect those delicate female dragons from sacrificing themselves to protect the balance of the universe. Just life. Chen Tao never wanted to see the female dragons leaving their bodies in the universe to protect others. The scene before made Chen Tao feel uncomfortable all over. Chen Tao doesn't think he is a king, so naturally he doesn't feel inferior to Wei Lia. "Arrive," came the voice. Vilia stopped. Chen Tao looked forward, and there was a forest in front of him. In the middle of the forest, a huge red dragon was entrenched there. It had its eyes closed, its body was crossed, and it was resting. This giant dragon is so big as a hill, and it is very scary. Although it was still some distance away from the giant dragon's position, Chen Tao could feel a burning breath coming towards him. The giant dragon is surrounded by emerald green woods, but between the emerald green woods and the giant dragon are dark scorched earth and trees burned beyond recognition. The scales on the dragon's body were red, the color of magma, with flames rising from them. The entire dragon was surrounded by flames. This scene made Chen Tao's heart freeze. This is a body made of flames. Chen Tao has seen a body made of flames. It is a characteristic that only elemental bodies have. But the problem is that this giant dragon is not only made of flames, but also flesh and blood. Is this a combination of genetic bodies and elemental bodies? Chen Tao frowned slightly. "If you want to live, I will leave its life to you," Valia said. Hearing this, Chen Tao looked at Valia. Valia said, "Do it." She waved her hand. Valia's voice fell, and the warriors behind her flew directly to the dragon. As soon as they approached, the dragon's eyes suddenly opened and it turned over. Valia frowned suddenly. A mouthful of fire spewed out of the dragon's mouth and shot at the people in front. Everyone pulled the reins of the lion eagle, and the lion eagle spread its wings and immediately separated. Seeing this orderly evasive action, Chen Tao's eyes lit up slightly. Obviously, This reaction is not formed in a day or two. It is a long time of training that has this reaction ability. In other words, this is the effect of training. It is probably Valia's idea to do such training. 6 people holding spears surrounded the dragon directly above. The spear shot at the dragon. Crazy to attract the dragon's attention. The dragon opened its mouth, and flames swept through, chasing these people with flames. And they were riding on lion eagles, and their bodies were very agile, and those flames could not catch up at all. It seemed that the dragon would stop after each flame. The flames just finished. Now, Valia said. The 12 people who had been prepared above had opened 2 huge nets respectively. My time is running out. Author, Chen Wunian. Chapter 200. The net was thrown directly from the top. The giant dragon did not react, and its body was instantly covered by a huge net. Roar. The dragon roared angrily, and the net instantly entangled the dragon. 2 huge nets tightly trapped the dragon, making it difficult for it to move. At this time, Muen held a huge spear and rushed towards the dragon. The spear pierced the dragon's back. Ouch! The giant dragon let out a mournful cry. Muen flew up, and the other warriors flew over and pulled out their spears. As soon as it was pulled out, the dragon's blood sprayed out. Muen took another giant spear handed over by the warrior and continued to pounce on the giant dragon to attack. The dragon was entangled in the net, and it was difficult to move its body. It was even difficult to turn around and spit fire at Muen. In this case, we can only let Muen bleed it. Chen Tao looked at this scene, his eyes lit up slightly. It seems simple to achieve this level, but Chen Tao knows very well how difficult it is. The dozens of people in front of me can be regarded as the super elites of the Air Knight ceremony. You are seeking death, the giant dragon suddenly spat out human words. Hearing this voice, Chen Tao's heart froze. He felt the dragon's anger and murderous intent. Weird. Chen Tao was a little confused. The dragon's voice didn't sound like it was in dire straits, it sounded more like it had just been angered. No wonder the dragon has other tricks. Under Chen Tao's gaze, the dragon's body turned into red flames, and the flames grew bigger and bigger. The burning sensation forced Muen to retreat. The dragon's body is getting smaller, and because the dragon's body is getting smaller, the web is shrinking. Did it burn itself? Muen asked, frowning. Suddenly, a flame shot out directly from the flame. The flames hit Muen, who had not yet reacted. Muen groaned and flew out. Fireballs flew out of the net and shot wildly outside. The dense fireballs directly hit the soldiers and the griffin. Ah! The screams continued. The warriors fell off the back of the griffin one by one and fell to the ground. The flames engulfed them, and they were either burned to death by the flames, or fell down from a high altitude and died directly. See this scene. Wei Lia's pupils trembled. What's going on? The huge net fell to the ground. The firelight slowly dissipated, revealing a figure in the firelight. Chen Tao took a look and saw a young man with red hair. The man was suspended in the air, with a pair of red dragon wings stretched out behind him. He looked around with a gloomy expression. The dragon was not burned, but turned into a human. Have the molecules been reorganized? Is this still possible? Chen Tao had a hint of interest in his eyes. Queen, withdraw. Chad flew back and looked at Villia. Villia brought 36 men, and now besides Chad, there were 6 warriors left. Seeing the scene in front of her, Wei Lia's eyes trembled slightly. She gritted her teeth and stared at the red-haired young man. She said, "Withdraw." The red-haired young man narrowed his eyes. You want to run? Can you run? He waved his hand, and a fireball flew out and shot at Villia. Wei Lia's pupils narrowed slightly. Suddenly, Chen Tao's figure stood in front of Wei Lia, and he waved his hand. Bang! The fireball was dispersed by Chen Tao with a slap. At this moment, everyone's eyes fell on Chen Tao. Chen Tao looked at the red-haired man in front of him and said calmly, "If you want to hurt me in front of me, you are not qualified." Wei Lia looked at Chen Tao's back, her eyes glowing with luster. "Chen Tao, is this okay?" Wei Lia was unsure of Chen Tao's strength. Chen Tao said, "Don't worry." The red-haired man stared at Chen Tao. He didn't talk nonsense to Chen Tao at all and raised his hand. Flames broke out all over his body, and the flames turned into fireballs, hitting Chen Tao like a violent storm. Chen Tao raised his hand. A transparent shield appears. Bang 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 bang. The fireball hit the shield like water hitting the sea, leaving no trace. Seeing the scene in front of him, the red-haired man's expression darkened. He flapped his wings and pounced towards Chen Tao at an extremely fast speed. Punch against the shield. Bang. The powerful force launched the red-haired man away. The red-haired man flipped twice in mid-air before stopping. He looked at Chen Tao strangely and said, "What kind of shield is this?" Chen Tao's eyebrows slightly stretched and he said, "Of course you don't understand the super-conceptual shield." Chen Tao raised his hand and swept a half-moon blade towards the red-haired man. The red-haired man's pupils froze, and he flew up to avoid it. But if you want to avoid the sharp silver weapon, it is impossible unless Big Z can disconnect the sharp silver weapon. The half-moon blade disappeared the moment the red-haired man flew away, and reappeared next to the red-haired man. Chiang. Hearing the sound of the collision of hard objects, Chen Tao couldn't help but frown. The half-moon blade was bounced away. Seeing this, the red-haired man raised the corners of his mouth slightly and stared at Chen Tao playfully. "The sharp silver weapon can't cut this guy's body. Is it so hard?" However, Chen Tao didn't care. The white half-moon blade disappeared, and the black half-moon blade appeared, slashing at the red-haired man again. The red-haired man looked at the black half-moon blade and said, "White is useless, do you think black is useful? Ridiculous." Puff. A sound of flesh and blood being torn apart sounded. The red-haired man's body was split in two. The red-haired man's body slowly fell down, and he could see his legs. Seeing this scene, the red-haired man's pupils trembled. How is it possible? The eyes of Vilya and others lit up. Win. Suddenly, the red-haired man's body, which was broken into two pieces, turned into flames, and the flames merged together and slowly turned into a human form. The red-haired man appeared in front of Chen Tao again, and he was intact. The red-haired man stared at Chen Tao and said, "You are not qualified to kill me." As he spoke, he spread his wings and turned around to fly away. The attack was ineffective against Chen Tao, so the red-haired man had only one idea left, that is, to run. Time stopped passing. The red-haired man's body was still in the air and turned into a blue code. Chen Tao's eyes fell on the red-haired man and noticed that there was a genetic code in the man's body that was different from other places. He raised his hand and took out the gene code over there. When he took it out, he saw a circular gene code. This is the core of the elemental body. Sure enough, this red-haired man has the characteristics of the elemental body. However, he also has the characteristics of the gene body. This is a special existence. Or rather, he is not special, but Chen Tao has not known about it before. Time resumed. The red-haired man continued to fly away. At that moment, his core had been taken away, but he himself did not seem to notice it. After all, it was a matter of a moment. Chen Tao looked at the red-haired man walking away, and his eyebrows stretched slightly. He closed his hands. The red core in Chen Tao's palm exploded. Ah! A shrill scream sounded. The red-haired man turned into a ball of fire and dissipated.